So, last time we looked at C and then we did A. A was this notation here, meaning that we were supposed to find some kind of a second derivative. Okay, so that's pretty important. We need to be specific about what kind of second derivative that is. But then they want us to use that as a way to decide whether our estimate is too big or too small, right? Okay, so let's break this down. D squared h over dt squared, that is the second derivative. But I'm going to ask you, is the second derivative with respect to what variable? It's actually t. So I want to explain how we get to this, and the notation might make a lot of sense here. So, well, sure. So would you guys agree with me that dh dt is essentially the first derivative with respect to time? So d squared h over dt squared is actually d dt of dh dt. Does that make sense? Like when you look at the notation, like where the little squareds are, that might actually be helpful. Do you see it? So it's really important that we realize this is not ddh or ddx or something like that. It's specifically ddt of whatever comes next. So this is hypercritical. ddt of dh dt is really what we're looking for. So let's think this through. If I'm supposed to do ddt of dh dt, do I know what dh dt is? Isn't it up there at the top? So let's think this through. If I'm going to do that, this would be ddt of negative 1/4 parentheses h minus 27. What on earth would this be? What do you think? Equals what? So it's not ddh or ddx or ddy or whatever, it's ddt of negative 1/4 h minus 27. Thoughts? Come on. Negative 1/4 dh dt. What do you guys think? Is that good, bad, close, way off? What do you think? Plus? So you could, if you really wanted to, you could do a product rule, but wouldn't D1 just be 0?
Yeah.
It would work out fine if you did it that way.
Okay.
It would. Let me rewrite this. What if we rewrote this? What if we distributed? Negative 1/4 h plus 27/4. Does that help? Well, let me ask you this. I'll be really generic about this. What's the derivative of negative 1/4 h? Isn't it negative 1/4? But you have to consider that we're doing ddt of something that only has h's, and so your chain rule will show up. And that dh dt is the chain rule factor. Well, what's dd whatever of a constant? Say again? Say again, Bailey? 0, yeah. So if you're doing ddt of 27/4,
So that is right?
that is right. That absolutely is right. Okay. So I hope you pay really close attention here because this will help you on our next one. What I could do is I could rewrite this a little bit. I want to see if this makes sense to you. I could rewrite this as this. Does that make sense?
What?
I replaced this with this. Does that make sense? Why would I be allowed to do that? How do I know they're the same thing? It told you right there. Right? So I'm using this to help me substitute. I don't know that I was absolutely required to do that here, but I could. In other cases, you will have to do something like that. Okay, so let's see here. I'm supposed to somehow use that to help me figure out if my estimate is an underestimate or an overestimate at t equals 3. So what do you think?
You know that it's going to be negative.
I know that what's going to be negative.
Or no, positive.
How do I know it's going to be?
A negative times.
Okay, let's do that. All right, so that, if we just continue on over here, that equals 1/16 times h minus 27. That would be my second derivative.
All right, guys.
Oops. So let's see here. So you're saying for any t that we care about, you're saying that this is positive for all t greater than or equal to 0, I guess? So then, can you say that? Can you say that that second derivative will always be positive for our time domain? Why?
Because
it's 1/16 times a positive number.
How do you, okay, so I agree
you know
that,
it's positive because
so
the
I-
integer is 90.
well, I agree that 1/16 is positive. How do we know that it's a positive number and then the second factor is also a positive?
Because they told you that the internal temperature of the potato is greater than 27.
Yes. That's right. So something bigger than 27 minus 27 will always be positive. Well said. So we can say that that's true because h is greater than 27 for positive values of time, for non-negative values of time. So this is where, like, writing out just a little bit of a logical sentence be extremely helpful for understanding. You guys are coming up with some awesome ideas. This is great. Okay. So the final thing we get to do here is make our judgment. So if the second derivative is going to always be positive for our time domain, then that estimate we did in 1a will always be an underestimate or an overestimate. Under is right. So I'll put this here and then we can talk about why. So we can say, therefore, it's an underestimate. Underestimate. Anybody want to explain why? Like how you connect those two? I'll help you. If the second derivative is positive, then the original function is? Concave what? Up. Yes. So the fact that the second derivative is positive means that whatever this curve looks like, it's concave up. Something along those lines, right? Sorry, Nick. So any tangent lines that I would draw to that concave up graph, any tangent line, no matter where it is, wouldn't all those tangent lines always be somewhere below?
Oh.
So that means that my estimate from before is an underestimate because all the tangent lines would be below that concave up curve. What do you think? Get into some pretty higher level thinking here. So if you're having any kind of a hard time, keeping up, and totally get it, it's okay. It's okay. Let's just keep at it. Okay, so I would like to wrap this up, but before, I'd like to ask if you guys have any questions. Okay, so I am now going to distribute this. This is not in your packet. I never know if we're going to get to this, so I don't put the packet here. This is a lovely. So you guys take one pass. You guys are taking pass. Okay, so first thing, hey, listen, whenever you're faced with one of these questions, we all feel this. It's got a lot of words. It's got a paragraph. My encouragement to you is take a minute and just read it like a story. Don't get too hung up on anything else. Just read it like a story. This is a no calculator allowed. Yep.
That's awesome.
I'm sure it's very happy to hear you say that. This is affectionately known, of course, as the landfill question. I just want you to read it. I don't want you to even worry about trying anything right now. I just want you to read it. And once you've had a chance to read it, if you wouldn't mind, please look through the 3 questions and ask yourself which of the 3 questions is asking me to do the find the particular solution, separate the variables routine that we've been working on. I want to focus on that. I want you to just try to identify that. Snake. I'm sorry. It's not. So as you know, I had to restart my computer, so I'm having to do a little redoing of something real quick. Okay, so how many of you think you know which question is asking you to separate the variables and find the particular solution? A, B, or C? What words told you that it was C? This one comes right out and tells you, doesn't it? Okay. So I would like for you guys then, so after having done the one that we did before, where you had to do some serious thinking to even come up with that, hopefully that, like you said, is a little bit easier to handle. If you guys would, see if you can handle C, where you actually find the particular solution. And I am finally ready for Jeff. There we go. So here we go. First step is we've got to separate the variables, right? It doesn't say that, but just know that that's expected if you're finding a particular solution. So I would say for C, my first step is this. W over W minus 300 equals 1/25 dt. So please look at what you've got. If you have that, that's worth 1 point. I want you to listen. I want you to kind of grade yourself on this. Yes, ma'am.
What if you took the 1/25 over?
I'm going to say I think that that's unwise because you're just creating more of a mess for yourself down the road. But it's possible to navigate it. But like I said before, I know that in the end I'm solving for W. So why would I bring stuff over with it that doesn't need to be there? So it can work out fine though. Next step, antiderivatives. So when you do your antiderivatives, you get ln, absolute value of W minus 300 is equal to 1/25 t plus c. And so, Eden, you might have had 25 ln of W minus 300 equals just t plus c. That would be just as good. If you have that, you're looking at a total of 3 points. You just collected 2 more. Okay? Questions so far? All right. As you know, my next step is always going to be to find my C by plugging in my initial conditions. So it's going to be this. ln of 1400 minus 300 equals 1/25 times 0 plus c. And at that stage, believe it or not, with my plus c in there and doing what I just did, I have just earned a 4th point. This thing is worth 5. So right now, in 3 steps, essentially, I'm 4 out of 5 points. That's a good place to be. Now, if I can just handle the algebra from here, I got it, right? So, any questions so far? Go ahead, Santi.
So you said the ln of the absolute value of 1100.
Right.
So I didn't really think.
Yeah, so that's, I think, a really important thing for you to think about. And then this is more of a test-taking thing. We all get it. You can do 1/25 times 0 in your head. We can all do that, right? We can all do 1400 minus 300 in our heads. You want to show, hey, I'm plugging the initial condition in. So I would definitely be in the habit of showing that clearly. Okay, so now it's just a matter of trying to figure out what C is and getting it plugged in there. I'm coming up with ln of 1100 is equal to C. And then I've got this to help me. It'll be ln of W minus 300 with the absolute values in there equals 125th T plus ln of 1100. Let's plug in the C in where the C is supposed to go. Now the algebra that follows could be tricky. I'm going to go e to the left side, e to the right side. Absolute value of W minus 300 equals e to the 125th T plus ln of 1100. As far as the absolute values go, what do we know about W? Starts at 1400 and increasing. Therefore, W minus 300 will always be positive. So the absolute value of that would just be positive W minus 300. I will add over now. So I'm going to get W equals 300 plus this other junk for my final particular solution. There's a number of ways this could be simplified. What I've written up there is perfectly okay. Here's another version if you wanted to. If you wanted to write W equals 300 plus 1100 e to the 125th T, that would also be good.
Why don't we just do T over 25?
T over 25, yep, of course you could do that too. Yep. Okay, so obviously if you got to that final answer, that's plus the fifth point. And if you had all those in there, for C, you'd have 5 out of 5. Overall questions on that one? So please, I really, really want you to do this on your paper, on your iPad, or whatever you've got. I want you to give yourself a score. 5 out of 5, 3 out of 5, 0 out of 5. Hopefully not, but hopefully you, at the very worst, separated the variables. Why don't you give yourself a score? Something out of 5.
So if you had it all right, but you didn't write down the step of like the 125th with the 0, would it be 4 out of 5?
Let's be tough on ourselves and say yes.
On the real test, would they do that too?
Sometimes. It depends on the year. I hate to say it, but sometimes like the question leader will be super picky about certain things, and other times they'll be like, let's just say 125th times 0. They know what that means. That's 0. And they'll usually try to be understanding about it.
Okay.
So it's usually more of a in your favor kind of a inconsistency than anything else. To be safe, yeah. All right, so I'm hoping now that we've done C, I hope that felt familiar to you, but I'm hoping that A and B, based on what we just did with the potato, I'm hoping that A and B also feel very familiar. Brendan, if you need to go, you're welcome to it. I can tell you need to go. Good luck today. Thank you. All right, so A and B, please take a look at those. I'm going to erase what I have up there for C unless anybody has a question. Now would be the time to say something. Okay. So please take a look at A and B. We'll look at some scoring here too. Okay, so for A, kind of like the other one we looked at, it's asking for the equation of the tangent line. So what are the two things you got to have to do that? Yeah, and the point of tangency is what?
0, 1400.
Does it make sense? Because it says, use the line tangent to the graph of W at t equals 0. So that's establishing your point of tangency. And at the start, there's 1,400. We kind of skipped over the idea that this is like a landfill, right? 1,400 tons of solid waste. Yuck. Okay. Anyways. All right, and then beyond the point of tangency, I also need what? Slope. Okay, so what will tell me about my slope?
dw.
That's right. So I need dw dt. So this is where this can get a little bit tricky because I want to know dw dt at my point of tangency, and that's t equals 0. What's the challenge about that?
Because you don't have the equation.
I don't have the what?
The equation for dw.
I do have the equation for dw dt. It's right here.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
Guys, what is the challenge? Listen, I want to make sure you get this. This is easily, you could just like go in one ear, out the other. I hope that you get it. if I'm trying to find dw dt at t equals 0, why is that potentially an issue? Yeah, my input is not t, my input is w. So this would equal, this would be 1/25. What goes in for the w? 1400. That's right, you got to pay close attention, make sure you plug the right thing in. That's minus 300. So let's see here, that would be 1/25 of 1100. And 1/25 of 1100 is 44. Sure, that makes sense. 44. Sure, because 40 times 25 is 1,000. 4 more would get you to 1,100. I like it. Okay, so at this point you should be equipped to do this. You could use W's and T's. You could use Y's and X's. I'll use Y's and X's this time. So you could say Y minus 1400 is equal to 44 times X minus 0. Would be at least an equation of the tangent line. Or you could write it as W minus 1400 is equal to 44 times T minus 0. Same kind of thing. And then to finish it off, it wants us to estimate W when T is 1/4. So I'm getting W minus 1400 equals 44 times 1/4. Well, that's 11. And if I add over, I get W is approximately equal to 1411 tons of solid waste. Ugh. What do you think? So here's how this one worked on points. If you got this equation of the tangent line, that was worth a point. And then, of course, if you correctly use that to estimate the amount of tons of waste at t equals 1/4, that was worth a second point. This was a 2-pointer. So please give yourself a score. Hopefully 2 out of 2, but just be honest. 0, 1, or 2 out of 2. Any questions on A? Okay, so then finally with B, it says find d squared w over dt squared in terms of w. That's pretty important. So would you guys agree, hopefully based on what we did earlier, we're really looking for this. ddt of dw dt. Okay, so this would be ddt, well gosh, did you guys get this equals 1/25 times dw dt? We're using the chain rule. This is really similar to that last question, isn't it? It wanted this in terms of w, so you really have to go here. 1/25 times 1/25 times w minus 300, where I've substituted really similarly to that last one, basically replacing this with this because of that. Does that make sense? Okay. And then we use a little reasoning here. I heard lots of good conversations about it. You could say something like, because W is greater than or equal to 1400 on our time interval, based on the fact that W starts at 1400 and only gets bigger, can't we say that the second derivative is always positive on our interval? Therefore, what kind of an estimate do we have? Yeah, therefore, I'll say it's an underestimate. Underest. There we go. So points. And then we'll do questions. So if you had your second derivative in terms of W, so if you had this right here, that was +1. And if you had it's an underestimate with some good reasoning, that was the second point. So again, 2 points there. Question?
Will you ever get an overestimate?
Very possible, sure.
You can't.
If it was a similar scenario, except you have maybe a little bit of a differential equation, but maybe the amount of stuff, in this case waste, was decreasing, and the way the numbers worked out with the subtraction, you always end up with a negative second derivative. You could end up with an overestimate.
So just to clarify, when you say it's an underestimation, it's talking about like W prime was 1/4 ours.
So it's talking about what we got in A. So in here it says, to determine whether your answer in part A is an underestimate or an overestimate. So we were asked to use our tangent line to determine roughly how much waste was there after 3 months. And we said, hey, we think it's approximately 1,411. B is addressing, hey, is that is that more than it really is, or is that less than it really is? And we've decided, based on our reasoning, that it's, 1411 is actually less than what it really is.
So for B, the points awarded, since like obviously we should give justification, but like is there a point awarded for like your reasoning? Because
Yeah.
it doesn't say like
Off the rubric, 1 point for having the correct second derivative in terms of W, and then 1 point for, I think basically I'm quoting, underestimate with reasoning.
okay.
So you got to have the underestimate and good reasoning. So if you just this is where sometimes people will say, well, on the AP test, just like throw a guess out there. So if for B you just said underestimate, you just coin flipped it, right? And you're like, okay, I sure hope it's an underestimate. You're not going to get any points. So they're going to try to guard against that. Speaking of the AP test, this is where I would like to finish with you guys today. This was a 9-point question, right? Correct? So every single FRQ is a 9-point question. So have you totaled up what you got? 5 out of 9, 8 out of 9, 2 out of 9, 9, whatever you got. So I want to show you some statistics from this.
I think if I do one.
So up until a couple of years ago, this was the worst scoring average question in the history of AP. This was question 5, I think maybe. I don't know if you can see. This is question 5.
Yes.
So the total number of points possible was 9. The worldwide mean was 1.63. So I was actually a reader on this question. And so there's a special category of scoring here. So like the way it works is if somebody tried really hard but they just did terrible and they didn't score any points, they get a 0. But if someone just left the book blank, I mean, they didn't write anything. They didn't even draw me a picture or write me a poem or say hi or anything. They wrote nothing. It's considered a dash, like they didn't even try it. So over 50% of the test booklets were dashes on this particular question, on number 5. So in other words, they went through A, B, and C, and they didn't even try anything. They didn't even give it a shot. They felt so totally lost. So I hope that that's an encouragement to you. Now, we're not shooting for average, but the average was 1.63.
Out of 9.
Out of 9. That's right. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, if all you did was separate the variables and get one of your antiderivatives right, you're over the average, right?
If you did though.
What if you didn't? You're in trouble. So Nick, here's the good news. I like to say this at this point of the year. It's February 11th, right? So we have all of March, all of February, basically, all of March, and all of April, 3 whole months, basically almost exactly 3 months for you to get better. So if you had success here, that's awesome. We'll get better. If you didn't have success on this one, that's okay. We'll get better, for sure.
What does a standard deviation?
You guys are good. Have a good rest of your day. That's a measure of spread. So like, if the average was 5, and every single person got 5.
So that's what I'm blaming it on.
Oh, okay.
Because I could not.
But
So it's like on either side, right?
But I feel better
so
now.
like
I think I can
if half
maybe
if like
do
50%
some
of the country got it at 1,
this
and 50% of the country got it at 9, the average would still be 5. The standard deviation would be much larger. than the standard deviation. So 1.63, you can see that that's a pretty representative spread. Like, although you got to say, oh no, yeah, no, that's not too far off. We'd have to do some statistical analysis to see if that was like significant.
What do you need on the AP Calc test to get 5? Like,
It's available out there. I will say that it varies from year to year.
yeah.
So like what